right. Celebrations. I forgot celebrations, didn't I? All right. Who's had a birthday this week? Or an anniversary or something they want to celebrate? A new great-grandchild. Well, that's worth celebrating. Great job. What's his or her name? Indy. Indy. That's a dangerous name. Indy is short for independent. We found that out after naming our child Indy. Yeah, very independent. Yeah. Oh, yes, Marianne set off the fire alarm on Friday and had the fire brigade here, so that's worth celebrating. Good job. All right, another one down the back. A 10-day law program. Great job. Awesome. Great job, Riley. Very cool. Very cool. Awesome. All right. Cool. So just a reminder, we're doing things a little bit differently. We're just trying something a little bit new, where we are having the message earlier, and then we're having our worship set towards the end, because I don't know about you, but I believe that worship is good as a response to the gospel, as a response to what Jesus is doing. So we're trying that at the moment, and lots of great feedback about that. So this week, we just finished our series Reunion, and this week we were supposed to be having Bruxy Cavey joining us live from Canada. So what happened there is, originally when we started the Reunion series, we were in lockdown. So having them live was just going to work really easily, because we're doing it all live, online and anyway. But through the wonders of, not the wonders of, but the time differences and technology and all that, we decided it was probably just going to be too hard to try and get them to turn up exactly at the right time on the screen and do a Q&A with them. So what we did is, I've actually already recorded a Q&A with Bruxy. I did that on Friday morning, right during the fire alarm, which was excellent timing. And we're actually going to put that out on our social media channels on Tuesday night at 7:30. It'll be coming out. And so it was great. It was a great opportunity to sit down and ask him all the questions that you guys asked, and he answered them really well and had some great thoughts. And I really, really enjoyed it. I was a little bit nervous, to be honest, at the start, because I'm such a big fan of Bruxy, and then actually seeing him on the screen, I hadn't met him before, it was kind of weird. So anyway, he made it all very relaxing. I was awkward as usual, but anyway, it's what I do best. All right, so that'll be coming out on Tuesday night. So in lieu of that, there's a message that I've been wanting to share for quite a while, and so I thought I'm going to share this message this morning, and I hope that it encourages us. And then next week we have 3 people speaking. We've got Jesse speaking. We've got Janelle and Haynes all speaking next week, doing a short sort of 10-minute message each. So that's going to be a lot of fun. And then the week after that, we've got Chantel preaching, which is going to be awesome. How cool is that? And then we're going to be starting our new series, and we've got a whole lot of different people speaking in our new series, including Matt Lansdowne, who's coming down from Bethel and Whangarei. So that's going to be a whole lot of fun. Yes. Cool. All right. So let's start. So the message this morning is around living in exile. I've just had this thought, this sort of stirring in my heart about this idea that we are actually living in exile. We are living in exile, and so I want us to potentially disrupt our idea of freedom a little bit this morning, and present an idea that hopefully will help us navigate the times that we're living in from a kingdom perspective. Because who knows that we are living in some times of change. There's a lot going on in our world right now. And how do we actually navigate this from a kingdom perspective? Some of my thoughts today may challenge the way that you have previously thought. But that's okay, because that's what we're all about here, eh? Let's disrupt our thinking a little bit and look at things a little bit differently. So I want us to dive into some scripture to start off with this morning. But in 1 Peter actually describes us as sojourners and exiles. And so 1 Peter it says, "But you are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people for his own possession, that you may proclaim the excellencies of him who called you out of darkness and into his marvelous light. We've been covering that a little bit in our last series, that we've been called out of darkness and into his marvelous light. He goes on to say, once you were not a people, but now you are God's people. Once you had not received mercy, but now you have received mercy. Beloved, I urge you as sojourners and exiles to abstain from the passions of the flesh which war against your soul. Keep your conduct among the Gentiles honorable, so that when they speak against you as evildoers, they may see your good deeds and glorify God on the day of visitation. So Peter is encouraging us, the church. He's also encouraging the church that he's writing to at the time. But he uses these words, that you are sojourners and exiles, that you are foreigners in a different land. The land that you live in is not your own. You are exiles, you are sojourners. And he continues to say this, live as people, I'll just read the bit before. Be subject for the Lord's sake to every human institution, whether it be to the emperor as supreme, or to governors as sent by him to punish those who do evil and to praise those who do good. For this is the will of God, that by doing good you should put to silence the ignorance of foolish people. Live as people who are free, not using your freedom as a cover-up for evil, but living as servants of God. Honor everyone, love the brotherhood, fear God, honor the emperor. So Peter is encouraging us and the original audience here that you are sojourners, you're exiles, you're living in a foreign land. But as foreigners, as exiles, we must also honor the emperor. And so for them, they are living under the rule of the Romans. They are living in a land that's not theirs. And Peter is encouraging them to honor the emperor. But he says this, live as people who are free. Live as people who are free. He's writing to a people who are not free. But he's saying to them, live as people who are free. So here's the thought that I want us to consider today, that we are all living in exile. That every system of the world is Babylon, and we can disrupt these systems not by grasping for power, but by living the way of Jesus. And the way of Jesus is not grasping for power, but actually laying power down. And so the question that we continually need to ask ourselves is how do I do Calvary in this situation? How do I bring the cross or the way of Jesus and the cross into this situation? How do I demonstrate self-sacrificing love in this situation? And I think one of the things that we need to maybe disrupt with our thinking a little bit is this idea that Jesus died on the cross so that we didn't have to. In some sense, yes, he did for us what we could not do on our own, but he died on the cross also as an example for us to follow. You know, Jesus, he said, come follow me, and then he spread his arms and died. And this is the call of every Jesus follower. Just before it's up there. Don't forget, you can ask a question. We'll have Q&A towards the end. We've got a cell phone number this week, so it makes it a little bit easier. So let's consider this, that Jesus didn't lay down his rights. Because on the cross, he laid down his rights. He didn't lay down his rights so that we could demand ours. He laid down his rights as an example for us to follow. So the upside-down nature of the kingdom is not power over, but it's actually power under. It's not overpowering the systems of the world, but it's actually disrupting them by laying down our power and coming under. So this idea of living in exile is actually, it's a theme or it's a plot that you actually find right through the story of the Bible. And the Revelation, the final book of the Bible, it summarizes this whole idea through different poetic symbols and themes. And so the Revelation is both this pastoral book and it's also a prophetic book. And it's this letter that's written to 7 churches, and they were actual churches that were living under the rule of the Romans, and they were stuck in the middle of this you've got the Greeks who had their philosophy, and they were stuck in the middle of that, and then the Jewish traditions and the Jewish religion, and then the Romans who were overlording them. And so John writes these letters to these churches that are in exile. They're living in the midst of this. And so so John is pointing out in the Revelation that every world system is Babylon. And that there is a raging battle between the empires of the world and the kingdom of heaven. And every worldly empire is actually seeking for your attention, your affection, and your allegiance. Every empire of the world is seeking your attention, your affection, and your allegiance. And so John writes this letter, or these 7 letters, and the idea is this, that he's writing to churches that are either being persecuted and faithful, or are actually finding comfort in the empire and are compromising. And he's writing to these churches, and he's actually writing to comfort the disturbed and to disturb the comfortable. So he's writing to comfort the disturbed and disturb the comfortable. And so I think the question for us today is, where do we find ourselves? Does the revelation disturb our comfort? Does it comfort us when we're disturbed? Because this is what this book is all about. So the word revelation in the Greek is this word apocalypse. Has anyone heard the word apocalypse? Yeah. Contrary to popular belief, the word apocalypse does not mean end of the world. It actually just means an unveiling or a revelation. It's a revealing or an unveiling. So Paul on the road to Damascus has an apocalypse where he meets Jesus, and Jesus is like, no, why are you persecuting me? And he has this revelation about who Jesus really is, that he is God. He has an apocalypse on the road to Damascus. And so the revelation is this unveiling that there will always be empires that war against the kingdom of God, and it calls us to be the faithful, reconciling presence of Jesus in our communities, no matter what is going on in our world. It's pointing out the fact that we are exiles in Babylon. But it's also this hope that the faithful will overcome by the blood of the Lamb and the word of their testimony. That there is hope in a future resurrection and the reunion of heaven and earth. It's this amazing book that is both pastoral and prophetic. You see, the persecuted church get this a lot more than us, eh? Like, they get this idea that we are exiles. It's their daily reality. It's their daily reality that they are not wanted, that they are not safe, or that they are not welcome. Babylon is obvious for them. You know, they only have to look around at their current reality to see Babylon at work. It's obvious for them. But for us here in the West, Babylon is actually deceptive, it's seductive, and it's attractive. So here in the West, Babylon is actually inviting us to share in its comforts. It's inviting us to share in its lust for power and control. But we know that Jesus said, not so with you. When he said, my disciples will not do things the way that the world does. Not so with you. My followers will not grasp for power, they will lay down their power. You know, we are actually called to disrupt the systems of the world, not by grasping for power, but by actually laying down power. So here's the question that I want to ask us this morning. Are we becoming familiar with Jesus? Are we becoming familiar with Jesus? So consider this. When was the last time that Jesus disrupted your life? When was the last time that Jesus disrupted your way of thinking, your comforts, your ideologies, your religion, your politics? When was the last time that Jesus turned up and turned the tables of your heart? When was the last time that he disrupted your hypocrisy? You know, because this is what we find Jesus doing consistently as he's walking, as he's meeting with people, he's actually disrupting the systems of the day. He's disrupting the religious systems. He's also disrupting the Roman systems. I love where Jesus says, in the Sermon on the Mount, he says, if someone asks you to carry their gear for a mile, carry it for 2. And so back then, if a Roman soldier asked a Jewish person who technically is a slave living in exile, if a Roman soldier asked you to carry their gear, their sword and armor, you had to legally carry it for a mile. It was just the law. You had to carry it for a mile. And so Jesus is saying to these people living in exile, he's saying, listen, if a Roman soldier tells you to carry their gear for a mile, carry it for 2. You do the first mile for slavery, you do the second mile for freedom. Disrupt the systems. Now you've got a whole mile to walk with a Roman soldier whose whole system has just been disrupted, and they're going, why are you doing this? Let me tell you about the self-sacrificing way of Jesus. When he's calling us to disrupt the systems, not by grasping for power, but by actually laying it down. So when was the last time that Jesus disrupted your way of thinking? See, the cross and the way of Calvary should regularly disrupt us. It should disrupt my comfort. It should disrupt my prejudice. It should disrupt my lack of compassion and empathy. It should disrupt my privilege, and it should disrupt my complacency and apathy. The cross is disruptive. I don't know about you, but if you came this morning for a nice, comfortable message, you came to the wrong place. Sorry. But following Jesus is not a call into comfort. It's not. It's actually a call into exile. It's a call to live differently, to see the world differently, and not to partner with the world and its systems and grab for power, but to actually lay down power and to live a different way, to think a different way, to act a different way in our world that actually turns the world up the right way. See, someone asked me recently, how does the kingdom of heaven come? I believe it comes in 2 ways. It comes through the supernatural and it comes through the unnatural. When it comes through the supernatural, when we pray for healing, when we lay hands on someone and their body is restored, and many other ways in the supernatural, prophecy and words of knowledge and things like that bring the kingdom of heaven. But it also comes in the unnatural, when you forgive someone. When everything on the inside of you is saying, this is not natural, this doesn't feel good, but I know that Jesus has called me to live this way. And the kingdom of heaven comes. When we choose to make peace in situations. When we choose to be peacemakers. Come on, blessed are the peacemakers. Blessed are the peacemakers. See, in the world, who knows that the world wants peace? Come on, you watch every beauty pageant. Yeah, come on. Like, what's one thing that you could wish for? Oh, world peace, like that's the thing. The truth is, everyone wants peace. But in the world says that the way to get peace is war. If we can overthrow every nation, then we'll have world peace. But Jesus is saying, no, the only way to get true peace is to deal in peace. It's not to defeat everyone so that we have peace. See, the systems of the world often want the same thing. Come on, a secular society wants utopia just without the presence of God. Come on, our society wants the kingdom of heaven just without a king. And so we are called to bring the kingdom of heaven, to live a different way, the upside down way of the kingdom. So the question is, when were you the last time Simon of Cyrene? When was the last time that you identified with Simon of Cyrene? Where Jesus is carrying his cross to Calvary. He's carrying his cross to the hill, to Golgotha, like he's carrying his cross, and the Roman soldiers point at you and say, you carry the cross. And Simon's just going, I just come to pay my taxes with my 2 boys. You carry the cross. Come on, that moment disrupted Simon's life, totally disrupted his life, turned his world upside down. You see echoes of that moment right through the book of Acts. Come on, his 2 sons are named as the faithful. And who knows that he turned and not only carried the cross of Jesus, but followed him for the rest of his life. When his whole world was disrupted. When was the last time that Jesus disrupted your way of life? The truth is that we strive for comfort, really, don't we? I strive for comfort. Like, if I'm being totally honest, if I think about it, and I've been thinking about it this week, I orientate my whole life around comfort. About what's comfortable for me, what's going to be comfortable for my family. And that's not always bad. But I would like to suggest that striving for comfort is the death blow to the church. When the church strives for comfort, it is the death blow for the church. Some of you have heard me interview my friend Avish in Wanganui, who's an Indian pastor who came from the most persecuted part of India to be a Christian, most persecuted place to be a Christian in India. And he was telling me the story about when revival broke out in India, when it first started to come through from the north and started to literally, the whole country was starting to turn to Jesus. It was quite a radical revival. And the government were trying to stop this revival from happening. And so they were persecuting the church, they were persecuting Christians, a whole lot of crazy stuff. He was telling me all the stories about it. But he said in the end, the government worked out how to stop Christianity in India. How do we stop the revival? They worked out, stop persecuting them. Comfort is the death blow to the church. Stop persecuting them. And it was true. They stopped persecuting them, and the revival stopped. So John is writing to these 7 churches that are living in exile, in this place where you've been persecuted for following Jesus. The way of Jesus is disrupting the Roman Empire. The way of Jesus is disrupting the Jewish religious system. And he's writing towards these churches who are either persecuted and faithful or comfortable, complacent, and compromising. And I think when we move towards comfortable Christianity, we inevitably actually domesticate Jesus. We make him look like us, sound like us. We make him fit our political views, our religious views. We domesticate him. But I'd like to suggest right now that you can't domesticate Jesus. Like, you just can't domesticate Jesus. We can't make him fit our ideologies or fit a certain political view. He just doesn't fit. We can't reign in the kingdom of God. Do you know what I mean? Like we can't keep Jesus quiet in the face of injustice. We can't keep Jesus quiet in the face of the lost or the afflicted. We can't keep Jesus quiet about the hurting, and we can't keep Jesus quiet about the darkness that needs light. Like, we can't domesticate Jesus. We can't make him fit into our comforts. I think that's a challenging thought, eh? For us who are living in exile. For us who are living in exile. When Jesus was crucified on the cross, it says that he was crucified next to 2 thieves. That's not technically quite right. The translation there is missing it a little bit. He was actually executed next to 2 revolutionaries who were killed. They weren't crucified because they'd stolen an old lady's handbag. Like they were crucified because they were revolutionaries. They were revolting against the Roman system. They were revolting against the Roman kingdom. And so Jesus was crucified next to these revolutionaries because he was considered to be a revolutionary himself. Now the problem is that the Romans wanted to kill him because he was a nationalistic Messiah, and then the Jews wanted to kill him because he wasn't. So you can't make Jesus fit into the mold. He didn't fit into the mold then, and he doesn't fit into the mold now. And so to understand that we are living in exile means that we don't fit the mold. We don't fit into the, if you're talking about politics, we don't fit into the right and we don't fit into the left. We're not supposed to. We're supposed to bring the kingdom of heaven. And it looks different. And it acts different. And it maybe smells different, I'm not sure. But Jesus brought a different kingdom. Instead of violence, he used love. Instead of war, he used peace. He did start a revolution, but not against Rome, but against the dark powers and the principalities at force in the spiritual realm. Come on, who knows that the enemy thought that he had Jesus? Like, I finally got him. I've killed him. But the very thing that the enemy thought was going to end it actually ended it for the devil. And see, the Jews didn't get it, the Romans didn't get it, and not until the Holy Spirit came did the disciples get it. And now we're caught in this tension too. We are caught in this tension too of who is Jesus? Is he meant to be a nationalistic Messiah, or is he, who is Jesus? And how do we live as Jesus in exile? Well, this is a question we have to ask. Because, man, there are some crazy ideas out there about what it means to bring the kingdom of heaven. We just need to get New Zealand back for Jesus. Jesus didn't ask for a nation, he asked for a bride. He asked for a church, a people who would follow him and lay down their lives for him. Lay down their lives for their friends, lay down their lives for their enemies even. This is the way of Jesus. And so we find ourselves in this tension. I want us to watch a short video now, and then we'll have a look at some questions, if there are any. Are we ready?
Resist Babylon by revolting or withdrawing. Others gave in, adopting the Babylonian way of life and accepting these new gods as their own.
And you might think those are your only two options, but the prophet Jeremiah told them to do something totally different and surprising. To settle in, build houses, plant gardens, grow families, and most surprisingly, to seek the well-being of Babylon and pray to the Lord on its behalf.
So this is like a third way.
Yeah, it's not compromise or revolt.
What does it look like?
Well, there's a whole book of the Bible that explores that question. It's the story of Daniel.
Daniel was one of the Israelites taken into the Babylonian exile.
And because Daniel had a royal heritage and education, he was recruited along with some friends to work in the high court of Babylon.
Work for the enemy? That would be compromise. Or they could gain the king's trust and take him down from the inside.
That's what you might expect, but instead, they take Jeremiah's advice and choose the third way. They serve the king of Babylon, taking on Babylonian names and even clothing style.
So they seek Babylon's well-being. But in doing so, aren't they just giving up their heritage?
It could seem that way, but actually they aren't. As you read on, the story focuses on moments where they draw the line, and they choose faithfulness to their God and resist the influence of Babylon.
So, for example?
Well, like when they're commanded to bow down to the idol of Babylon and give allegiance to the king as if he's a god.
They won't go that far.
Right. This is where you see their true loyalty. It requires them to critique Babylon's idolatry of power, its arrogance, its injustice, but they do it non-violently by laying down their lives. And so God vindicates Daniel and his friends for their faithfulness.
So they would serve Babylon, seek its well-being, but their loyalty was always to God.
Yeah, this is what Jeremiah was envisioning. The way of the exile is a combination of loyalty and also subversion.
So they're still exiles, but don't Daniel and his friends long to go home?
Yes. In fact, Daniel believed that God was going to send a ruler to bring down Babylon and create a true kingdom of peace.
When did he think this ruler would come?
Well, at first he thought within his lifetime, but then he had a dream where he found out that after Babylon would come another oppressive empire, then another, then another.
And so, Babylon did fall, and Israel did get to go back home, but now they're ruled by Babylon's successors.
And so they maintained the mindset of an exile, waiting for their true home to come to them. And they continued the same practice of loyalty and subversion to any new versions of Babylon that came along. And this leads us to the time of Jesus.
The empire of his day was Rome, ruled by Caesar. Now, some Israelites wanted to resist, while others gave in and adopted Roman culture and its gods.
But watch Jesus carry on the subversive loyalty of Daniel. Like when he said, it's fine to pay taxes to Caesar, give him back his coins. But then he said, don't mistake Caesar for God. God's the one who deserves your total life and allegiance.
So the way of Jesus is this same mix of loyalty and subversion.
Yeah, like he taught his followers to love and even bless their enemies. But he also got arrested for speaking out against the corrupt leaders of Jerusalem and Rome. He critiqued their idolatry of power, and it cost him his life. But God vindicated him by raising him from the dead as the true king of the nations.
The king that Daniel had hoped for.
Right. And Jesus promised that one day his kingdom would prevail.
And so until then, his followers are living in a type of exile.
Yeah, this is why the Apostle Peter calls followers of Jesus foreigners and exiles. He told them to respect the authorities of whatever place you happen to live, to honor and love all people, but then he reminds them that this isn't their true home. They're still living in Babylon.
But, well, they're not living in Babylon. Babylon doesn't exist anymore.
Or does it? In the Bible, Babylon has become a symbol that describes any human institution that demands allegiance to its idolatrous redefinitions of good and evil.
Okay, so we all live and work in Babylon. How do I seek the well-being of Babylon while my allegiance is to someone greater?
Yes, Jesus' followers are called to live in that tension between loyalty and subversion. That's the way of the exile.
All right. It's a good video, eh? Yeah. Subversive loyalty. That's what we're called to live in that tension. And the truth is that no matter where we are in this world, Babylon is vying for our attention, for our affection, and for our allegiance. And I just, let's just call back to last week when we were talking about faith. The word faith, the most accurate description of the word faith is allegiance. To have believing loyalty to Jesus. This is what faith is. And we must realize that in our world we have a whole lot of things that are vying for our allegiance, vying for our attention, vying for our affection. Let me just skip forward a bit. I just want to, as an example of this, I think in our world it's like this. There's this tension, yeah. So we're living in Babylon. We're living in the world. I mean, who knows? Who would like to live in a world with no money? Hey, like how great would that be? To live without having to worry about money, because money literally rules our lives. Like every part of our day normally revolves around money, or a big part of our day revolves around money. That's why we go to work, so that we can pay our rent, so that we, like there's this system that we are kind of enslaved to. And so how do we live in such a way that we actually have to exist in the system, but how do we live in such a way that it is not ruling us, that our allegiance is not to it? That this is what Jesus is calling us to, and this is why he said you cannot love both God and money. You can't give your allegiance to money and your allegiance to God. You can't do both. And so we're living in this thing. And so we exist in this system, and then there are moments where we are given a choice. Are we going to compromise? Or are we going to follow Jesus and lay down our lives for this? You know, teenagers, when you're at the party, you know what I mean? Like you go to the party because it's good. Like you need to be there. But then there's these moments of choice, isn't there? Eh? There's these moments of choice. Am I going to compromise? Am I going to go this way, or am I going to follow what I believe Jesus is calling me to do in this moment? And all of us face these moments of compromise. All right. I'm going way longer than I expected, so let's jump to questions if we have any. Is that on? Just yell at me. Here we go. All right.
Which might be a little bit awkward it's not a full question, but exile does not equal shame, question mark. So maybe some clarification about what exile is.
Totally. So yeah, exile does not equal shame. So think about it like this: the systems of the world, so we talk about overpower versus underpower. When we grasp for power, normally the tactics are shame, guilt, condemnation. They are overpower tactics. And so for us to live in exile means that we live in opposition to that. We don't live in shame, guilt, or condemnation. Peter said, live as though you're free. You might live in exile physically. You might live in a system that is against you, but you are a free person. Live as though you are free. The world will use shame. The world will use condemnation and guilt, but we are a different people who don't use those tactics. And I think that's a really good thing. If you're looking at someone and thinking, because who knows, when it comes to justice issues, I think all of us would agree that we probably have the same heart on justice issues. We would probably all have different ideas about how we go about bringing justice. Now, I would like to suggest that justice isn't really something we do, it's something we have become. We are now living, walking embodiments of justice. The kingdom of heaven has come through us. We are justice. And so if you see a Christian using shame, guilt, or condemnation in the endeavor of injustice, they are partnering with the kingdom of the world, not the kingdom of heaven. Hope that makes some sense.
Excellent. And moving on from that, what's an approach towards Christians who exile others for not being Christian enough or doing the wrong things?
What's my approach to them? Yeah. Exile? So again, I think it comes down to we tend to exile people when we rising stuff about who's right and who's wrong, and the left politics and the right politics, and all of that sort of stuff. That's not where we should be. Where would Jesus be? I think is the question we need to ask. And I think Jesus would be listening. So for me, Jesus calls me to love. The very first step of love is to listen. And so what I've been doing over the last few weeks, while there's been a whole lot of polarizing views, I've been sitting down with different people who have experienced the world different from me, and asked, how's it been for you? Tell me about your experiences. I mean, ignorance is the pathway to prejudice, isn't it? Like, I think, Black Lives Matter movement. Well, I've never experienced racism, so therefore it doesn't exist. That's what it sounds like most people are saying. And I think that's ignorant, and that leads to prejudice. So I think the first thing we need to do as the church is listen. And if there has been injustice, then how can we bring the ministry of reconciliation to individuals? How can I sit down with someone who has experienced racism and say, on behalf of a white person, I want to apologize and say I love you. What could we do to bring the ministry of reconciliation, I think, is important.
Awesome. I've got two questions that are similar enough that we'll tie them. So I've gotten comfortable. How do I get disrupted? Along with, what are some practical ways to get to know Jesus?
Great. Practical ways to get to know Jesus is to come to our next series. While we discover the ways of Jesus. I think, how do I get uncomfortable? We have to put ourselves into places where we are uncomfortable. Let me throw this idea out there, and this might be a challenging idea for some. And then, is that the last question? Okay, because we're getting on. Okay, so Sarah can give me the rest of the questions. I'll jump on social media at some time during the week. Happy to answer them during the week, or try. Not saying that I give good answers. Anyway, a thought. Okay, so our strivers for comfort. I've been thinking about the marijuana referendum, the marijuana reform that's coming up. So as a citizen of New Zealand, I have a certain view and about what I think will be best for our country. But as a citizen of heaven, I actually aren't concerned either, because no matter which way that falls, it's win-win in my opinion. Because if my whole goal is to just live in an environment of light, I never get to be the light. There has to be darkness for me to be able to step out of my comfort zone and step into a place where I need to bring the kingdom of heaven and bring light into a situation of darkness. And so I might look at that and go, well, our New Zealand's going to get darker if it goes this way. The kingdom within me goes, woohoo, what an opportunity. It's win-win. Do you know what I mean? But if my goal is comfort, then I would see it as a loss. And I think when it's the same with when we're parenting. It's like, do we want to protect our children, or do we want to empower our children to be light bringers into the kingdom of darkness, or do we just want to keep them comfortable and safe and hide them in the light? I mean, eventually they're going to have to go into the big bad boogie world, like we need to empower them. And so I think so that's my perspective on that. I think there's two ways to think about it. I mean, you look at Paul. And he's been persecuted, and they say, oh, we're gonna kill you. And he's like, that's awesome, I'm gonna be with Jesus as soon as you kill me. And they're like, oh, all right, well, we're gonna persecute you. And he's like, that's awesome, because I'm laying up treasures in heaven, that's the greatest thing ever. And they're like, well, we'll set you free. And he's like, awesome, I'm gonna preach the gospel. It's win-win here, baby. Like that is the kingdom view, it's win-win. Come on, we never lose. Come on, if the darkness gets darker, who knows that we get to go, woohoo, we get to bring the kingdom of heaven, we get to bring the light. Come on, if it gets lighter, then we go, woohoo, this is great. But, it's win-win. It is truly win-win. And I just think that if we understand that we are exiles living in a foreign land, that actually we have the way of Jesus, the ways of Jesus are actually subversive and will disrupt the systems of the world way more than grasping for power. That is the way of the world. That is the way of the world. We do not grasp for power. We lay down power, and we trust that this way of Jesus will actually disrupt the kingdoms of the world in a way more than what we could possibly do grasping for power. When at some point we've got to trust that this gospel works. We've got to trust that the way of Jesus works. That this kingdom that he has given us is powerful and it's effective and it can pull down the strongholds of the world, not through grasping for power, but through laying down power and laying our lives down for our enemies. It's crazy. It's upside down and it's beautiful. And you're all invited to participate in that. Isn't that great? Yeah. Cool. Hey, worship team, why don't you come back? I've got some more thoughts, but we'll finish there. I feel like the questions are like the best bit. Like if we could just start with the questions, you wouldn't need to listen to me preach. All right. Hey, why don't we stand? We're going to gather around communion. We're going to respond to the gospel. We're going to respond to Jesus this morning through worship. And I think, that question is like, I'm feeling like I'm comfortable. How do I get uncomfortable? I think you've got to bring that to Jesus. You've got to bring that to Jesus. I had this moment with God once where I was like, God, you need to break my heart for young people when I was a youth pastor. Like I said, I'm a youth pastor. I'm going, God, I don't feel broken for these young people. Either you need to break me or I'm out. Like, are you willing to pray that kind of prayer? Or, do you know what I mean? Like, it would have been way more comfortable for me to just say, I'm out. But no, I see, God, you either need to break me for this or I'm out. Because I realized that I was no good as a youth pastor until my heart was broken for the things that God's heart breaks for. And so I invited him to do that, and then he did it, and it was horrible. Like I was undone, I was wrecked. I was like no good for anything else anymore. You know what I mean? Like I give my life to this thing now. And so this is the invitation that we are given to participate in. But that's a dangerous prayer. And the truth is, in our society in the West, it's just so easy to just go the other way, just to look the other way. It just is. And so this is the tension that we live in. This is the exile for us. Will we choose to partner with the comforts of the world, or will we choose the way of Jesus? So we're going to gather around the table and we're going to participate with Jesus. He laid down his life for us, and he calls us to follow him, to lay down our lives even for our enemies, for those that persecute us. Let me pray. Father, we just thank you. We thank you that before we were living in exile, you were living in exile. We thank you that you're the God that didn't look from a distance and just tell us what to do. You said, hey, I'm going to come and participate in your suffering. I'm going to come and participate in your humanity. I'm going to be persecuted for you. I'm going to show you what it looks like to live in exile. And then I'm going to let humanity pour out its full wrath upon me on the cross. So we thank you, God, that you never call us to do something that you were never willing to do yourself. We thank you that you are the greatest leader. You're not just pointing at us and saying, this is what you should do. You're saying, come follow me. I'll show you how. We thank you that you're the God that goes before us. We thank you that you're the God that's not just with us, but you're the God that's for us. We thank you that as we share around communion right now, as we take the elements, as we take the bread and the juice that represents your body and your blood spilt for us, that in doing so we say, Jesus, we want to share not only in your glory but also in your suffering. And that's a dangerous prayer. But we thank you that this is also the most fulfilling thing that we can do, that this is what it means to be truly human, to lay down our lives for others, to forgive and to bring peace, to bring reconciliation. We thank you for this ministry that you've called us to. We thank you that the church is not the ministry, but the church are the ministers, that we are the ministers of reconciliation. And Father, I pray that we could be that in our community, that we could be the reconcilers, reconciling those that are far from you, back to you, back home. Reconciling disruptive situations and chaotic situations, places and spaces where people are arguing and at heads to one another. I thank you that in those workplaces, in the schools, wherever it is that we go during the week, that we walk into those places as the ministers of reconciliation. We thank you for the third way. And we follow you, Jesus, in the third way. Yeah. Thank you, Lord. Amen. Yeah. Awesome. Let's share around communion together and let's praise, let's worship him. He's worthy of our affection. He's worthy of our attention. He's worthy of our allegiance.